So what's the one thing that 99% of anime and manga have in common? Berserk, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Attack on Titan, Chainsaw Man, Jujutsu Kaisen, Demon Slayer, and almost everything else are all inspired by the same thing. And that thing is the underappreciated 10 out of 10 horror masterpiece, Devilman. So before I get into this video, which is probably going to be a little bit longer than usual, I just want to say thanks to all of the people who've been watching this channel from the start, and to all the patrons that keep this channel up and running. And also as a side note, this video isn't going to be monetized, so if you want to help out the channel, maybe consider subscribing or supporting me over on Patreon. So Devilman is a strange topic because in one way it's really underappreciated, nobody makes videos about it, and nobody tells you how much influence it actually has. But at the same time, a lot of stupid freaky people out there have gotten their hands on this masterpiece, mainly because of the cringe homo anime Devilman Crybaby, which I don't associate one bit with Devilman. So if you've heard anybody talking about Devilman or that shitty anime, just forget it, because most of it is lies, perpetuated by tourists that want to make everything gay and retarded. And that's it, just put simply, so you can get mad at the words I use and the stuff I say, but forget all of that bullshit. Devilman is one of the most awesome pieces of work in the medium, and that spans across comics as well. In my opinion, Devilman beats a lot of comics that were ever made, and I'm not going to go really in depth page by page on this, but I am going to talk about how much I really do love this work. Oh yeah, and if you're a fan of any of the animes and mangas that I mentioned, like Berserk, and you want to get offended at the fact that I said that your precious manga might have been influenced by something else, then you need to grow up here, because Devilman was probably also influenced by something that came before it. And it's okay to point it out that Berserk is a mix of Conan, Fist of the North Star, and Devilman. That doesn't mean that Berserk or any of that stuff sucks, it just means that they're directly taking from Nagai and his manga. So before I get into Devilman and what makes it a masterpiece of horror, gore, action, and how it laid the groundwork for every single shonen and seinen to come after, I'm gonna have to fill you in first on the creator, because if you didn't know, the guy is an absolute legend. You could consider Nagai the Japanese equivalent for Frank Miller, because the guy didn't just make Devilman, he pushed the boundaries with every single work. His notable works, excluding Devilman, are Violence Jack, a manga that is extremely important and could get an entire video. I don't know if you want that, so if you do, let me know. But Violence Jack is something that has so much influence, it's hard to put into words. And the worst part is, it's never been translated into English physically, so nobody will ever know. But basically, anything post-apocalyptic and badass comes from this, because in the darkest of dark post-apocalyptic worlds is Violence Jack, a character who isn't really the bad guy, but by no means is he good. And we've seen that done over and over to a tiring extent. But Violence Jack is one of the real ones, where after reading it, you'll just be disturbed, but at the same time amazed at how good the action, storytelling, and put simply, just how badass it is. It helped inspire any world like Mad Max, Berserk, and Fist of the North Star, where the wasteland is probably the most dangerous place on Earth, and only one lone drifter can defend the innocent. So if you haven't checked out Violence Jack, then you need to, because it's one of the coolest things out there that is pretty hidden away and not really talked about that much. He also worked on Cutie Honey, which I can't really talk too much about because I don't really know anything about it. But from the looks of it, it's more light-hearted and plays into the trope of any Nagai work. Yeah, I forgot to mention that most anime and manga, especially Nagais, are not really for the faint of heart or people who have a problem with fan service or the male gaze. So basically, if you're a bitch, don't read or watch anything from Nagai. He also pioneered in the mecha genre with Mazinger Z, which is absolutely iconic over in Japan and is yet to get an English physical release. And although I don't know too much about it and people will argue about this, he also worked on Getter Robo. But all you need to know is that the dude is an absolute legend and one of the best of all time in the genres of horror, gore, action, and anything mecha. And if you don't believe me about his influence in any of those works, just read Berserk and compare it to Violence Jack, then come back to me. And also, if you don't believe me that he created the post-apocalyptic wasteland, not some French dudes over at Metal Hurlant, then just acknowledge the fact that Go Nagai drew a Japanese poster for Mad Max. You know, the movie that is basically a tribute to his manga. Go Nagai should be mentioned every single time people talk about the best of the best in the comics medium. He's better than Alan Moore, he's better than Grant Morrison, he's better than Garth Ennis and Neil Gaiman. And all of those guys get the limelight, even though most of those guys are retarded, communist, or some freak who needs to be in prison. So what I'm saying is the people who get the most praise usually aren't the actual best in the medium. And if you look at any conversation about manga and anime, his name might prop up here and there, but it's just passed off as some old manga or anime that might have influenced some later stuff, when in reality he laid the groundwork for everything to come after. Put into American comics terms, it's kind of like turning around and saying that Stan Lee might have influenced some later stuff, but he didn't really matter, when in reality nobody can say that because Stan Lee influenced everything. But for some reason people like Osamu Tezuka, Go Nagai, Leiji Matsumoto and Takao Saito do not get the respect that they most certainly do deserve. A lot of these guys were making the medium darker and more adult before Americans ever did. So screw you if you can't acknowledge that all of these legends came before precious works like The Sandman and Watchmen. But I'm getting sidetracked here talking about comics, and that's a whole different video on how manga beats comics in many ways. So without further ado, let's actually get into Devilman. But a quick disclaimer before we start: if you're anyway interested in Devilman and want to read it, or if you want to come at me and comment about it, then you have to read the physical English release. And it doesn't have to be that exact English omnibus, it can just be any omnibus or collection you can read in any language. The point is, reading manga online really does need to stop, because it damages such great works by making them seem basically retarded. Do not by any means read Devilman online from any source, because what they do is leave out some of the most crucial parts of the story, edit the art and text to make it seem modern and gay. And no, I'm not joking about that. People are literally going in and changing what was written back in the 70s to sound like something from today. So yeah, if you want to read it, make sure you have the right physical release, or at least a proper translation. And if you want to argue with me underneath this video, first of all, I'm not going to respond, you're retarded. And second of all, you probably saw some weird edited panel and you don't really know what Devilman is about. And that goes to anybody else as well who's getting offended about any of the stuff I say. Make sure you've actually read Devilman and classic manga before you comment. So Devilman starts off with one of the best openings to a manga or comic ever made. And people rag on Go Nagai because, like any classic manga, the art can go from god mode to just simplistic within a few pages. And this is because spastics can't understand that there were time limits and constraints back in the day. Stuff like Vagabond, Berserk and much more, even though they have great art, have to go on hiatus and take long times to be made. Classic manga didn't have that privilege, and also, all that stuff aside, the art is just plain awesome in Devilman. Even the simplistic stuff has a great sense of character design, humor and expression. But if you're anyway interested in horror, gore, Lovecraft, the occult, then you really do need to check out this manga, because the opening is like a love letter to classic monsters, Lovecraft, old paintings and depictions of hell by artists like Gustave Doré, and it's truly some of the best stuff I've ever seen. And as usual with Go Nagai, I do have to warn you that the subject matter is pretty extreme. There can be a lot of violence and nudity in ways that might freak you out at first, but after some research kinda makes sense. Like Devilman has some of my favourite lore I've ever read regarding the legions of hell and the underworld, but it paints angels in a way that is genderless, and that doesn't mean that they're a big floating eye, it means that they're both male and female. And before you start commenting saying that Devilman is woke and it's this and it's trans, you have to do some proper research to see that Renaissance artists painted depictions of angels with both genders. And without spoiling anything majorly in Devilman, you you do have to realize that Satan, for a good while in old paintings and depictions, is also depicted as an androgynous figure, which lines up with a lot of manga and anime that people call gay. Like in Devilman, one of the main characters, Ryo Asuka, once again, without spoiling the overarching plot of Devilman, does have some influence taken from those paintings. And if you didn't already know, the same goes for other characters like Griffith from Berserk or Shin from Fist of the North Star. These kind of creepy looking guys with long blonde or white hair. So for the final exhausting time, it's not gay, they're just based off of Satan, because they're usually the villain. It just makes sense. Stop being weird about it. But yeah, if you read the opening of Devilman and you're not immediately hooked, then I don't know what's wrong with you. But after this epic display of some of the best art you've ever seen and an absolutely amazing setup, really revolutionary, we then meet our main character, Akira Fudo. Now once again, the main character, Akira, is extremely influential and important, because any character in manga and anime who goes from a crying wimp into a badass comes from this. So if you don't know anything about Devilman, I'll give you a quick summary. This absolute wimp teenager, Akira Fudo, in high school is being bullied and his girlfriend doesn't really respect him, until his old best friend shows up out of nowhere wearing a trench coat and defends him. His best friend Ryo, with no explanation, tells him that he needs to follow him. Ryo reveals to Akira a truth that he just cannot accept, and the first time I read it, I don't know, I just found it absolutely awesome. Devilman is really adult and philosophical because it explores a lot of Nietzschean and Jungian themes. The main setup for Devilman is the fact that, see the way humans always have this inherent fear of the dark, that something is out there to get them. Well, that fear is actually real, and it's been genetically passed down through the ages, because hundreds of years ago humans were prey and they were not at the top of the food chain. What was at the top of the food chain was demons and devils from hell. And eventually, after years of torturing, suffering and survival of the fittest, came the Ice Age, and it destroyed the demons and devils apparently for good, freezing them in the Himalayan mountains. But hundreds of years later, Ryo and Akira find out that the devils have broken out of the ice and are here to take over Earth again. And herein lies the absolute genius of Devilman. To beat the legions of hell that are going to take over Earth, Akira has to take on the form of Devilman. He has to become one of these demons to fight them. Now, it might not be the most original idea, it might have been done before, but in anime and manga, this is definitely the first most important case, and probably the most badass, because Akira doesn't just take on the form of any devil, he takes on the form of the demon Amon, which is the strongest warrior in the legions of hell. And that right there is the essence of the entire story and what it means. Demons in the world of Devilman can take over humans, but people with bad control and no real morality will be taken over immediately. But because Akira is so weak and innocent and has a good pure heart, when he gets taken over by this ancient demon warrior, he can actually fight it back and use it against the demons, leading to some of the most badass heavy metal stuff ever portrayed in a manga. Now that's just the basic plot. There's a lot of stuff in here that I really do love that I could get into, like the entire atmosphere of the manga. I don't know if it was just me, but Devilman is the type of manga that you don't read from a phone screen on some shitty translation. It's this type of story, at least for me anyway, that encapsulates the classic Halloween, Samhain feeling that you'd get from a Universal horror movie or any Hammer film production. Some people might find it boring, but I think that those people are just plain wrong, because Devilman pulled me into this story and I didn't even know it. Like, I've tried reading Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Avengers comics that do not do the same thing, because they have no sense of atmosphere or world building. And not only does Devilman truly exceed at world building, painting the ancient age of demons as this hellish wasteland, or the modern day, which is urban dark cities that are being taken over by really disturbing monsters that are doing things that you would not expect in a shonen manga. Really, that's the thing that I love about Go Nagai. It builds up the most horrific, disturbing things that really pushes the boundaries and goes over the line many times. But then it gives you the Avenger anti-hero that has the soul of a man but the powers of a devil, Devilman. And as a fan of characters like Wolverine and Daredevil that have absolutely great vicious fight scenes, especially Wolverine, with some really ahead of its time artwork where Devilman is just kicking the crap out of people in really gory and badass ways. I'm so used to American fights ending after a few pages, but Go Nagai has no fear to elongate them for, I don't know, 20 pages straight. And Go Nagai doesn't just excel at action and making things really cool with wide eyes. He also has great characters, and to be honest, the guy really did do his research. Like in the world world of Devilman, Purgatory is not some hellish landscape and is instead a heavy metal nightclub. Which I don't know about you, but that's the most metal thing ever, and if you can't accept that, then you're probably gay. Where to bring out the power of the devils, Akira and Ryo have to take part in basically a modern Black Sabbath. And the manga does a great job of explaining the witch trials and the difference between a Black Sabbath and a Black Mass. And if you want to cry about Satanism and occultism, just go fuck yourself, because we've had enough of you complaining in the 80s trying to get heavy metal and gory movies cancelled. There'll always be some boomer who has a problem with nudity, violence, or the fact that something might just be dark and related to the occult. Not everybody wants to settle down, be a good Christian, and become a robot for the state. And that's another element of Devilman that I love. The fact that it might be the most punk rock thing ever, where it breaks all the rules. And the same goes for other manga like Violence Jack and Space Pirate Captain Harlock. People like Go Nagai and Leiji Matsumoto have no problem with getting political or philosophical within the stories, saying things that a lot of people out there will not agree with. But I could do an entire different video on the other masterpiece, Space Pirate Captain Harlock. So if you'd like to see that, do let me know. And back to how disturbing Devilman can get, that is a common theme in all of Nagai's works. The fact that he'll show you the most horrific thing that nobody ever wants to see, but at the same time gives you an anti-hero that will get revenge. And Devilman really gets dark with it, to the point where Akira gets broken down as a man. He sees some of the closest people around him being terrorized by some of the worst evils. And as I said earlier, with the awesome metal atmosphere, with the rain beating down and lightning striking, Akira has no other choice than to stand up for the people who have the worst wrongs being committed to them, and the only hope they have is a devil. Seriously, if you haven't read this, it has some of the coolest and best fight scenes ever made. But other anime and manga try to do what this does, and in my opinion, sometimes it comes off as cringe. For example, I know I'm going to trigger a lot of people who are jumping onto this manga in the last few couple of months, but Berserk basically does the same thing, where it crosses the line and shows you the most disturbing things ever, and then the main character will usually get revenge. But in Devilman, it's really written in a way that you feel bad for Akira and the people around him. But in Berserk, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't made it to volume 3, I just find it kind of funny. You can call me tourist, you can call me whatever you want, but I don't hate Berserk or anything, but the choice to go from the Black Swordsman badass revenge character and randomly out of the blue pull it all the way back to the character's backstory, the biggest badass of all time, Guts. And I don't even know if I can say what his backstory is, but it gets to a level of darkness which I don't know if it's supposed to be dark comedy or not. Now, I'm not making light of any of the subject matter in Berserk. I'm not saying that Kentaro Miura should be arrested for what he drew and wrote, because that's bitch behavior, complaining about how dark and how violent and how really disturbing something is. If you can't handle it, then don't read manga. But at the same time, characters who are very, very similar to Guts, characters like Kenshiro, Conan and Akira, don't really have backstories that includes some big brolic black dude. Yeah, I don't know when Kentaro made that choice to take this absolute badass with one eye and one arm and really break him down and make him into some guy who can burst out into tears at any moment and doesn't want to be touched by people, because something really insane happens in his backstory. Once again, I'm not making light of it or saying that it should be taken out of the manga or anything, because that's absolutely stupid. I'm just saying that it's a bit comical that Conan's backstory is everybody he ever knew gets taken away from him and all he trusts is steel. Guts is the exact same thing, but for some reason there's some over-the-top thing added in with some massive black dude sneaking into his room in the middle of the night. I don't know, maybe I'm being extremely ignorant, so all the Berserk fans out there, if you've made it this far in the video, comment and let me know if after volume 3 of the manga, from that point onwards, does Berserk ever get badass again, or am I just going to be subjected to scenes that you'd see in a Quentin Tarantino movie? Because Go Nagai does the exact same stuff and darker in Devilman and Violence Jack, except his hero does not cry about it. But anyway, back to Devilman. One of the best parts about the manga is the character arc of Akira Fudo. And it's been done in almost everything like Daredevil and Spider-Man, where some kid goes from a weakling into an absolute chad who can kick anybody's ass. But Devilman might be my favourite case of it. One, because it's pretty badass, and two, it has great use of humour. And after he becomes Devilman, the dude is just going around kicking every single person's ass, dropping one-liners, to the point where his girlfriend is just treating him like a god. Now you can cope and say that's edgy crap for 15-year-olds who are trying to be dark and mysterious. But to me it's pretty simple. I think it's awesome to see a story where a guy goes from a skinny weakling into somebody who can kick anybody's ass, take on demons, and make his girlfriend fall at his feet. Whereas in the case of a lot of new modern anime and manga, you just see the protagonists crying and they never break out of that phase. It's kind of lazy and repetitive. And I can just see somebody commenting saying that I'm a tourist because I don't like some brand new manga like My Hero Academia where the main character cries over and over and over. I watched 3 seasons of that shit. I don't know how. It sucked. But Devilman, like most things before the 90s, also has a great sense of friendship. And it sounds funny, but I'm just going to make a pretty big point here. The fact that after the 90s, people are incapable of accepting friendship. And they have to make everything weird and gay. Like in the 80s when Predator and Rambo came out, these masterpieces of action cinema, they were just badass. And they inspired every single kid and every single comic and video game. And right now you have these people going back calling Predator homoerotic and how gay it is. Seriously, fuck all of those people. The same people who can't read or watch Lord of the Rings without making it gay. And Devilman is one of those cases where it has some of the coolest moments ever. Where just like an 80s action movie, they have to do a bro handshake and go into the depths of hell to take on the hordes of devils and wipe every single last one of them from Earth. And I can make a part 2 video discussing what happens later on in the story and how epic it gets. But for now, I'm probably just going to leave it at that because I really do think that you should read this manga if you are interested. There's so many great elements of classic storytelling, good writing, great action and horror that it's undeniable that Go Nagai's Devilman is a masterpiece. And that's my response to anybody that wants to project some ulterior motive onto this story. Devilman is not about being gay, it doesn't have some crap art style, it's not some old manga that nobody read, it's the manga that everybody read. And up until this very day, there's still anime and manga taking from it. So if you're looking for one of the best mangas of all time, then consider delving into the dark, twisted, heavy metal kick-ass world of Go Nagai's Devilman.